Students, and welcome back to Unique Academy. So for class 12th English literature, we have been studying The Enemy from Vistas. It's a very lengthy chapter and we have almost covered 50% of that. So now, without wasting any more time, let's continue with our chapter.
So let's begin with second class of The Enemy. And before we start with the new part of the chapter, there is a quick recap. We have already covered that part where we get to know that Dr. Sadao and Hannah were standing out and they saw a figure coming out of the mist, and when they went near him, they found out he was an injured white man, and considering he was terribly wounded, he was wounded by a gunshot, as well as some rocks have hurt him. So there was a lot of bleeding, and to stop that bleeding, Dr. Sadao applied seaweeds available nearby to do a temporary dressing or packing to stop the bleeding. Okay, now let's begin. The best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea, Sadao said, answering himself. And now the bleeding was stopped for the moment. He stood up and dusted the sand from his hand. Now, Dr. Sadao was in our last chapter, in our last class, we covered that Dr. Sadao's hands were on their own. They were applying that seaweed to control the bleeding, but he was questioning. He had a lot of questions and thinking going on. And one of the major concern was that what they should do with this man. And then he answered himself that best they can do is to throw him back to the sea, since if they'll keep him, they'll endanger themselves, and giving him to Japanese forces, police won't be helpful either. Then he will definitely die. Yes, undoubtedly that would be best, Hannah said steadily, but she continued to stare down at the motionless man. If we shelter a white man in our house, we should be arrested, and if we turn him over as a prisoner, we would certainly die, Sadao said. Now Hannah too gave her consent that yes, it would be best to throw him back into the water. This would be very kind, right? If we'll shelter, then Dr. Sadao explained his wife Hannah the entire situation, that if we'll shelter him, we'll be endangering ourselves. We can be arrested for sheltering a prisoner of war. The kindest thing that would be to put him back into the sea, Hannah said, but neither of them moved. They were staring with curious repulsion upon the inert figure. Now Hannah too said, yes, अगर हम इन्हें पुलिस को देंगे तो police will definitely kill him, and if we'll shelter him, then we'll be arrested for helping a prisoner of war, for helping an enemy. So the best is to throw him back to the sea. But they both stayed there. They could not move to throw the body, that white guy, back into the sea. They were looking at that motionless figure with curious repulsion. Curious repulsion मतलब repulsion भी था. Repulsion माने opposite feel करना, ठीक है, oppose feel करना. And they also did not wanted to kind of harm that guy, ठीक है. What is he? Hannah whispered. Now Hannah said कि okay, now but actually who is he? There is something about him that looks American, Sadao said. He took up the battered cap. Yes, there almost gone was the faint lettering, a sailor, he said. From an American warship, he spelled it out, US Navy. The man was prisoner of war. ठीक है. Now at this point, when Hannah whispered, Dr. Sadao took the cap, and he says that he looks like American, and when he took the cap, there were faint lettering. Faint माने जब कोई चीज़ धुंधली होने लगती है, ठीक है, हल्की हो जाती है, कि ऐसी lettering थी कि yes, he is a sailor from the American warship. He is a prisoner of war. Who are prisoner of wars? Prisoner of wars मतलब जब दो countries के बीच में लड़ाई होती है, and we go and capture people of that country who were fighting with us, then they are prisoner of wars. He has escaped, Hannah cried softly, and that is why he is wounded. Now everything was clear why he was wounded, because he had escaped. He has escaped. In the back, Sadao agreed. Sadao agreed कि yes, he is injured in the back. He have a gunshot in the back cause he was running away. He was escaping from being a prisoner of war. They hesitated, looking at each other. Then Hannah said with resolution, "Come, are we able to put him back into the sea?" Now they both stayed there, none of them moving. Then finally Hannah spoke, broke the silence, and she said, "Okay, अगर हमें फेंकना है तो क्या we are able to do it? We are able to throw this wounded man back into the sea. If I am able, are you?" Sadao asked. Now Sadao said कि अच्छा अगर मैं फेंक भी दूंगा इसे दोबारा पानी में, if I'll throw him back and if I'll put him back into the sea, then are you able to do the same? No, Hannah said, but if you can do it alone. Hannah said कि नहीं, I don't have that much of courage that I can throw him back into the water, this injured men, poor men. But if you can do it alone, then do it. Sadao hesitated again. The strange thing is, he said, that if the men were whole, I would turn him over to the police without difficulty. I care nothing for him. He is my enemy. All Americans are my enemy. And he is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is, but since he is wounded. Now Sadao also hesitated, and then he said that the strangest part is, the difficult thing is that agar ye theek hota, if he would have been whole, uninjured, so I'll turn him into the police and I'll have no problem, no guilt, no nothing, क्योंकि भाई he is after all our enemy. But since he is injured, ठीक है, and Dr. Sadao himself is a surgeon, ठीक है, so it's becoming more complicated for them. You also cannot throw him back to the sea, Hannah said. Now Hannah understood and she said that okay, so you too can't throw him back into the sea. Then there is only one thing to do, we must carry him into the house. Then they continued the conversation that if you can't throw, I can throw, then there is only one thing left, that we should take him into the house. But the servant, Sadao inquired. Now they have 3 servants, and Sadao is concerned that if we'll shelter him, then what we will be saying to our servants. We must simply tell them that we intend to give him to the police. And indeed we must, Sadao. We must think of the children and your position. It would endanger all of us if we did not give this man over a prisoner of war, as a prisoner of war. Right now these lines are said by Hannah, and Hannah is saying that we will tell the servants that our intentions are to turn him in as a prisoner of war to the Japanese police. And in fact indeed we must, ऐसा ही हम लोगों को करना चाहिए. Why? We should think about our position and our children's. ठीक है, you are a reputed surgeon and scientist in the country, and we have young children. We should think about all these things. If we'll be sheltering him, we'll be endangering everyone. If we'll not turn him in as a prisoner of war to the Japanese forces, Japanese police, then we'll be endangering all of us. Certainly, Sadao agreed. I would not think of doing anything else. Now Sadao says कि yes, absolutely. I myself think that this would be appropriate कि हम इसे अभी ले जाएं, और then eventually हमारी intention यही होनी चाहिए कि हम इसे पुलिस को सौंप दें. Thus agreed together, they lifted the man. He was very light, like a foal that had been half starved for a long time, until it is only feather and skeleton. So his arm hanging, they carried him up to the steps and into the side door of the house. Now उन दोनों ने मिलके उस white man को उठाया. Now he was so light, it was like कोई चिड़िया, और चिड़िया भी ऐसी जो बहुत टाइम से भूखी हो, हाफ स्टार्व्ड हो, जिसमें सिर्फ और सिर्फ अब स्केलेटन और फेदर्स बचे हो, इतना लाइट वेट था वो. ठीक है, अब why is it compared to bird? Because bird's body structure in itself is kind of hollow, so that they can easily fly. So वैसे भी उनका जो पूरा body structure होता है वो थोड़ा light होता है, प्लस उसमें भी अगर उन्हें starve कर दिया जाए तो वो और भी ज़्यादा light हो जाएगा. ठीक है, feathers में तो कितना ही weight होता है, so इसीलिए यहाँ पे हम लोगों ने उससे compare किया है. This door opened into a passage, and down the passage they carried the man towards an empty bedroom. It had been the bedroom of Sadao's father, and since his death, it had not been used. Now they finally took him in, and from the door from which they were taking him in, that went to another room. और वो room किसका था? Dr. Sadao के father का, who is no more. उनके father expire हो चुके हैं. They laid the man on the deeply matted floor. Everything here had been Japanese to please the old man, who would never in his own home sit on a chair or sleep in a foreign bed. Hannah went to the wall cupboard and slid back a door and took out a soft quilt. She hesitated. The quilt was covered with flowered silk and the lining was pure white silk. ना वो लोग कहाँ ले गए, कौन से रूम में ले गए? डॉक्टर सदाओ के फादर के, जब से उनके फादर एक्सपायर हो गए तब से ये रूम empty है, but this room was given to his father and it was decorated in a completely Japanese manner. ठीक है, another reminder that they were seriously devoted to their country and tradition. ठीक है, his father, Dr. Sadao's father, was so much devoted to Japan and their traditional Japanese tradition कि वो अपने घर में कुछ भी foreign bed या chair भी बर्दाश्त नहीं कर सकते थे. ठीक है, so सब कुछ इस रूम में ऐसा था जिससे उनके फादर को खुशी मिले, अच्छा लगे. ठीक है, and now finally when they kept the body on the matted floor, Hannah went to the cupboard and took out a quilt. Quilt क्या होती है? रज़ाई होती है. Blanket क्या होता है? कंबल होता है. ठीक है, keep this as minor difference in mind. Now this quilt was covered with flowered silk. इस पे जो कवर था वो flowered silk का था और जो lining थी वो pure white silk थी. He is so dirty, she murmured in distress. Yes, he had better be washed. Sadao agreed. If you will fetch hot water, I will wash him. Now she says कि oh my god, he is so dirty. She was hesitant to put that clean white quilt over him क्योंकि he was so dirty. Firstly, he was bleeding and then he was in the water and everything, so he was extremely dirty. And Dr. Sadao agreed with his wife that yes, he is very dirty and he need to be washed. So you go out and get me some hot water so I can wash him. डॉक्टर सदाओ ने कहा था कि तुम मेरे लिए पानी ला दो गर्म, तो मैं इसे साफ कर देता हूँ. I cannot bear for you to touch him, she said. We shall have to tell the servant that he is here. I will tell Yumi now. You can leave the children. She can leave the children for a few minutes and she can wash him. Now again the feel of being enemy with that white man, ठीक है, is so strong कि Hannah instantly says कि नहीं, I cannot tolerate you touching him. ठीक है, you should not be the one to clean him, to touch him. So हमें अभी या फिर थोड़ी देर में कभी ना कभी अपने सर्वेंट्स को बताना तो है दैट वी हैव अ वाइट मैन इन आवर हाउस. सो आई विल गो टेल यूमी इज वन ऑफ देयर सर्वेंट हु हैंडल्स देयर चिल्ड्रन, यंग चिल्ड्रन. ठीक है, सो हैना सेज कि आई विल इन्फॉर्म यूमी, शी कैन कम एंड क्लीन हिम. Sadao considered a moment. Let it be so, he agreed. You tell Yumi and I will tell the others. Now Sadao thought for a moment and he said that yes, what Hannah is saying is correct. So he says that you go and inform Yumi about it and I'll go inform rest of the servants. Total कितने servants हैं इनके? 3 servants हैं. आपको आगे इस चैप्टर में पता चलेगा. But the utter pallor of the man's unconscious face moved him first to stoop and feel his pulse. It was faint, but it was there. He put his hand against the man's cold breast. The heart too was yet alive. Now, although he decided that let's get out of the room and inform the servants, he still stopped and firstly before moving out of the room, he came up and checked the pulse of that white man. ठीक है, utter pallor refers to pale. ठीक है, that extremely pale face of him of that white man compelled Dr. Sadao to come up and check the pulse of that white man. It was very weak. ठीक है, it was very faint, but it was there. Then he checked the heartbeat. Again, it was very weak, but he was still alive. He will die unless he is operated on, Sadao said, considering. The question is whether he will not die anyway. Now, Dr. Sadao said that he will, of course, die if he don't get operated now. अगर इसका ऑपरेशन नहीं किया तो he'll definitely die. And then he continues his thought and he says that question is कि what are the chances कि ये ऑपरेशन के बाद भी बचेगा. ठीक है, Hannah cried out in fear. Don't try to save him. What if he should live? What if he should die? Sadao replied. He stood gazing down on the motionless man. This man must have extraordinary vitality or he would have been dead by now. And then he was very young, perhaps not yet 25. Now Hannah says कि oh my god, please don't try to save him. Don't try to save him, don't try to operate him. ठीक है, what if he alive, what if he survive. ठीक है, हम लोगों के लिए प्रॉब्लम हो जाएगी, सो इसे बचाने की कोशिश मत करो. तो डॉक्टर सदाओ सेज कि what if he die. ठीक है, हमारी कोशिश के बाद भी ये मर ही गया तो there are 50% chances. He stood there and he kept looking. Who stood there? Dr. Sadao kept on standing there, and he looked at that motionless man. Okay, and he was thinking that he must be having, this white man must be having some strong, some great strength, ठीक है, strong vitals, a very good body, health, and that is why he survived all this trouble, all this trauma, ठीक है, torture. And the other factor for his survival was his young age. He was not even 25. That white man was not even 25 years old, so he was young, and he might be having some extra matlab some extremely good health. That is why he survived till now. You mean die from the operation? Hannah asked. Now Hannah is kind of confused. She says that you mean कि ऐसा हो सकता है कि even after operation he dies? Yes, Sadao says. Sadao says कि of course it is possible. He is so extremely injured and there is so much of blood loss. Hannah considered this doubtfully, and when she did not answer, Sadao turned away. At any rate, something must be done with him, he said, and first he must be washed. Now, while Hannah was standing there and comparing, weighing the pros and cons, the chances of his survival and death, Dr. Sadao turned and he said that, okay, anyways, something or the other must be done, but before that, he needs to be clean. कि अभी सोचो कुछ ना कुछ तो हमें इसका करना ही पड़ेगा, ठीक है, बट उससे भी पहले हम लोगों को इसे साफ करना पड़ेगा. He is so dirty. He went quickly out of the room and Hannah came behind him. She did not wish to be left alone with the white man. He was the first she had seen since she left America, and now he seemed to have nothing to do with those whom she had known there. Here he was her enemy, a menace, living or dead. She turned to the nursery and called Yumi. Now जैसे ही डॉक्टर सदाव ने रूम छोड़ा, ठीक है, वैसे ही she also left, cause again he was an enemy right now to them. He was an enemy, and Hannah did not wanted to stay with an enemy even while he was weak and unconscious. Now this was the first time, जब से वो लोग अमेरिका से आए हैं, this was the first time she encountered a white man, she saw a white man, and right now the facts are different. This man does not feel like any of those Americans with whom they were living in America, ठीक है, जो उनके फ्रेंड्स थे, उनके टीचर्स थे, जिनके साथ वो अमेरिका में पढ़ रहे थे, हैना और डॉक्टर सदाओ, ये अमेरिकन उन जैसा बिल्कुल भी नहीं है. He only brings the vibes of being an enemy, ठीक है, he is just an enemy, and she did not wanted to stay in the same room as him, so she hurriedly left that room and went out and called for Yumi. That's all for today. It's a very lengthy chapter. Please read this chapter and stay connected.